Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the release of Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing Thor: The Dark World, released in 2013 and directed by Alan Taylor. This is Thor's second adventure and his first one since the Avengers movie team-up. Overall, I like this movie, but it is not great. There are some good things going for it that I think improve from the first Thor movie, but it still doesn't really reach great heights. For positive, I would mention the world building and the visual effects, which was a positive from their first movie that just continues. I'd mention what they do with Loki as a villain becoming an anti-hero. I like the Game of Thrones element that's sort of introduced in this movie. I like the dark elf language, and I like the characterization of Thor in this movie. That was a negative that I had for the first Thor. So I like that they've turned it around, at least for me. And for negatives, the main negative is all of the villains and everything to do with the villains in this movie. Spoilers ahead for Thor: The Dark World. So for one positive, the world building and the visual effects continue to be pretty cool. We spend a lot more time in Asgard than we did in the first Thor movie. So it's pretty cool to see more of the world building, and the costumes continue to be really cool and unique, and we learn more about the lore of Asgard, and the visual effects are pretty great. There's a lot more thunder and a lot more fights and battles, and there aren't as many negative sequences as I thought there were in the first Thor. We also have that really great element introduced by Kenneth Branagh in the first Thor movie, where we have Asgard as just a regular realm, and then the backdrop of every scene is this beautiful nighttime sky, as they are kind of a realm in outer space, technically a planet of aliens, but the world building and the visuals look really good in Thor: The Dark World. I also like what they did with the Loki characters. So Loki, portrayed by Tom Hiddleston, again does a great job. In the first Thor, he's an ally and then is revealed to be a double crosser. In the Avengers, where he is the main villain, he's a total villain, and then he gets taken back to Asgard for Asgardian justice at the end of the Avengers. So in this movie, I like that he's got consequences. He's thrown in jail for the rest of his days. He's never going to get released, and he's just isolated. His mother visits him, but his father's kind of done with him. And then Thor is mad at him. He has a real brotherly approach to Loki. So I like what they do there. But then, of course, they need him to be on their team because of his trickery, and he knows how to get in and out of Asgard when they face this threat. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, another positive that they introduce here is sort of a Game of Thrones element. In the first Thor movie, they hired the director Kenneth Branagh, who had a lot of history and experience with Shakespeare and Shakespearean elements in his movies and things that he had done. And I think that served the Thor characters very well. In this movie, they decided to do something different. They brought on Alan Taylor, who had some experience directing episodes of Game of Thrones, and so they kind of tried to bring a Game of Thrones type energy to Thor: The Dark World. I think it does make sense how there is a lot of vying for the throne, and Loki and Thor and brothers, and it's a family drama, so I think there is some overlap with Game of Thrones. I don't think they nailed it in that regard as much as they did in the Shakespearean element. And I do prefer the Shakespeare type of approach, but I do like that they tried something new, and even though it didn't totally land, I think it made sense to go for it, especially where the popularity of Game of Thrones was at the time of the production and release of this movie. Another positive is the dark elf language. So in this movie, we're introduced to the dark elves. I'll have more to say about them later. But for the movie, they decided that they wanted the dark elves to speak a different language. So linguist David J. Peterson created a language for the Dark Elves. And as I've mentioned before, I'm a huge language nerd, and I just commend any movie that will put the resources and time into creating a language for the production of a movie. So he created a whole Dark Elf language called Shivaisith. And whether the language is good compared to other languages, I don't care too much. I think it sounds like an elfy language. It sounds foreign, and I just commend them for doing that. So that's a positive in my book. And then the final positive is the characterization of Thor. So I think they finally got it. And that might have been a controversial hot take that I didn't like how Thor was characterized in the first Thor movie. In the Avengers, I think he gets more humanity and he gets more depth to his character. So I think they've built on that. And then now here, we get to see more. So I think the reason why it works now is even though Thor must be insanely old, and we find out later that he is very old, but even though he's seen many things and had many battles, his time on Earth or Midgard actually did change him. It wasn't just that he fell in love with Jane, although that's part of it, but he saved the planet. He worked with the Avengers. He had teammates and he had these relationships that were like unto the relationships he had built with the Warriors 3 and Lady Sif on Asgard. So I feel like he does have a connection to Earth. He does have a reason to want to save it. And then when Jane gets infected by the Aether, and he just wants to destroy it because it needs to be destroyed, but he also wants to protect her, I just think his characterization works a lot more here. His motivations make sense. He has actually learned and grown from his time on Earth and with the Avengers and everything. He doesn't want the throne anymore, and it really feels like he doesn't want the throne. So I think his characterization really hits here, and then it carries on. I like what they do with Thor in the rest of the MCU from here going forward. Now, unfortunately, the big negative here are the Dark Elves as the villains. So in this movie, we're introduced to a race of Dark Elves from another one of the realms, Svartalfheim, and their goal, I think, is they want to get the Aether and plunge the world into darkness. They have Christopher Eccleston as Malekith, who is a character from the comics, and then they also do have Adewale Akinwoye Akbaje as Curse, who's another character from the comics. And I think those are two strong actors. They just don't seem to have a reason to be there. It frustrates me that the Dark Elves want to plunge all of the 9 realms into darkness using the convergence when all of the realms line up, so they can do it all at once. Okay, that makes sense. But why do they want the realms to all be in darkness? There's no answer for that in the movie. So it frustrates me. I don't get why they're trying to do it. And not that I'm much for giving suggestions for how a movie could be better, but for me, if the Dark Elves could see in darkness, move faster, become stronger, and have some kind of an advantage in darkness compared to other living creatures, then that is all it needs to make sense for me. They want to plunge all the realms into darkness because then they have a physical advantage and then they could take over everything. I think that's it, and that works. But in this movie, they want to plunge the world into darkness and they want to use the Aether to do it. We find out later that the Aether is an Infinity Stone, particularly the Reality Stone. So it does make sense that they would use that to change reality and turn everything into darkness. But they don't say why. And then Thor and Odin and all of our heroes are like, we must stop them from plunging things into darkness. But why? I know that I wouldn't like to live in darkness forever, but they want to stop it because they want to stop it. It just doesn't make sense. And their language is cool, and visually they look cool, but I just don't get their motivation, so that's a negative. And then this is nitpicky, but in the comics, Malekith has half of his face is purple, and then half of his face is not purple. In this movie, he gets hit by lightning, so it chars up one side of his face. Okay, I can live with that. It's not purple, but it's like he's split down the middle and he's that. But then as he gets infected by the Aether, the rest of his skin turns like gray. So he's like dark and charred on this side and then gray on this side. And the gray is so dark that it doesn't work. They lose the contrast. So visually, I don't like that. So overall, I just think the Dark Elves as villains are negative. Now, how might Thor the Dark World connect to Avengers Doomsday? Well, we do know that Chris Hemsworth as Thor will return in Doomsday, as will Tom Hiddleston as Loki. I do think that Thor is going to meet his end. I think he will be defeated by Doctor Doom, which will show Doctor Doom's strength, and it's going to pull in our heartstrings. So that's my prediction for Thor. And then Jane Foster and Heimdall are both in Valhalla. We don't know that at this point, but you find that out in Thor Love and Thunder. So they're still around by the time Doomsday comes around, but those two actors are not on the cast list. I also think there will be no mention of Infinity Stones in Avengers Doomsday. So that's my review of Thor the Dark World. What do you think of this movie and how do you think it might connect to Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd, where you can see the list for the movie marathon, as well as all of the previous and some upcoming movie marathons that we have. The next movie in this marathon is Guardians of the Galaxy. See you at the movies.